Welcome back, guys! Today is the final level before we get into the exciting stuff. So brace up, buttercups. I'm gonna teach you everything you need to know about the basics of an Arduino Uno. So let's talk about power first. The big silver square in the upper left is where you can plug in a USB type B connector to the computer, and that's actually a program. The AC socket at the bottom takes 7 to 12 volts and is great for higher power. And these power input sources will provide power to these 4 pins, the 2 grounds and the 3.3 volt and the 5 volt. There are a couple other voltages and grounds, but just focus on these ones for now. They're the most basic. So next up are the digital pins, and these are really going to be your meat and potatoes, 0 through 13. 0 and 1 are for UART communication. It's a little beyond the scope of this basic tutorial, so worry about them later. 13 is special because it's connected to an LED onboard, so if you want to use it to read things, then you have to connect it to a pull-down resistor, but I'll touch on that in a second. Tildes! Tildes next to things, little squiggles, basically mean that you can use pulse width modulation. What is pulse width modulation? Well, thank you for asking. Pulse width modulation basically means that you have a pulse, in this case between 0 and 5 volts, and you are modulating or changing the width of it to send a tone to a speaker or to control a motor or a servo. You can also use these pins as both inputs and outputs, which is useful because you can send a signal to, say, this fan, or you could read a value from this motor to determine its position. Next up, we've got the analog pins. And analog pins are going to be the most complicated thing we have on here. They're the spice on top. They're the pins A0 through A5, which is thankfully labeled analog in. And it's labeled that because you can only read analog values off of this. You're not allowed to write analog values off of this. I know it may sound a little counterintuitive, but effectively what this is going to look like is if you're reading data from a sensor, you're going to be reading a voltage from 0 to 5 volts and any of the voltages in between, which it then transforms into a numerical value of 0 at 0 volts and 1023 at 5 volts. But we've talked an awful lot about hardware, so let's talk about software. And the best way I've found to talk about software is not to talk about it, but to do about it. So we're actually going to make a software program that's going to do something on the Arduino, and it's going to be called the Blink program. So don't worry about keeping up with me here. There's just a couple of key things. Firstly, make sure you have the right software. So go online and download the latest Arduino IDE or integrated development environment. Next up, you'll notice in the code here I wrote pinMode 13 output, which basically just means that on pin 13, I want it to be an output pin. I want it to write values. And then when I went down to the loop, where it's going to just loop the code that I want it to do, I want it to digitally write a high value and then a low value with a couple of delays in there. Delays are going to be in milliseconds, that's why it says 1,000. And whenever it blinks like this, it means that it's uploading, and then we should see a blink every second here. And that's all the basics in a nutshell, and we've been building up to this point with all these videos to get to this one instant, because now we have the ability to take this Arduino and use it to control any electronic, like this monster truck in the next video.